Dear learners, I am Christina Georgy, your academic counselor, and I welcome you to my session. For those who are attending this online, let me remind you that this is a specialized session meant for the course code BEGC105, which is titled American Literature. As per the request of a few of our learners, this session will be recorded by me. So shall we move on to Ernest Hemingway? You ready? Yes. Dear learners, today the topic we will be addressing is Ernest Hemingway's The Snows of Kilimanjaro. So we will start off with Ernest Hemingway. So this falls under Unit 4 of Block 4 of your study materials. Even during your school days, you must have heard of Ernest Hemingway, haven't you? Yes. So I'll give you an introduction to Ernest Hemingway. I know it will be difficult for you if in case you don't have your study material with you. I'll share the study material in my study group so that you can have a look at it. By study material, I am referring to the official study material. I have the PDF with me and I hope that helps. So remember, we are studying American literature. So obviously Ernest Hemingway was an American writer. He was not just a short story writer but also a novelist and a journalist as well. We can say that he had a strong influence on 20th century fiction, and his lifestyle was quite adventurous, and this public image that he had later brought him admiration from the later generations also. So whenever you study one particular writer, it is mandatory, or rather it is advisable to have an understanding regarding some other important works written by this particular writer. So have you heard of any other work written by Ernest Hemingway apart from the one that we are studying at the moment? The Old Man and the Sea. That is a very famous short story written by Ernest Hemingway, and this was published in the year 1952. Another important short story is titled For Whom the Bell Tolls. This particular work was published in the year 1940. There are also a lot of other examples. If interested, you may have a reading on Hemingway. If you look at your study material as part of section 4.2, they've given you a chronology. What do you mean by the term chronology? See, whenever you come across some unfamiliar term, make sure that you find the meaning associated with the term. These days, you wouldn't be depending on a dictionary, I suppose. It's okay even if you Google and understand. It's always better if you could find the meaning, and it wouldn't be a childish act if you could write it down also. That would actually help you have a better understanding. Yes, I accept that answer. But to put it in specific terms, yes, chronology is more or less an arrangement of the major events. So here they have provided you a chronology with respect to the life and works of Ernest Hemingway. So do you think it is essential to study the life and works of a particular writer? Obviously, there are advantages. Firstly, because you get an idea regarding this particular person. Who was he? What was his style? To which era did he belong to? Which are his notable works and things like that. Moreover, from the TEA perspective, this will help you. How exactly? Yes, this will help you write an introduction to the particular question that would turn up for your TEE with respect to this particular author and his work. Am I making sense to you? So very often when we write an essay answer, may that be even a short answer, we always attribute the first few lines to a quick or brief mention regarding the author, right? So keep that in mind. So those who have your study material may have a look at page number. See, I wouldn't mention the page number because there could be differences. Mine is not a latest print, I believe. Can you share the page number if you have the textbook? Let me see if it's the same. Yeah, it's the same. Okay, thank you, Preeta. So it's 126 here also. Glad. So I would rather mention it as section 4.2. So now comes the question, should you study each and every year and each and every detail mentioned? From the TE perspective, I would say you don't have to, because I quite understand that it is difficult. At times you don't even remember your own phone number and your own birth date. By your own, I refer to your immediate family also. So if you try to remember all these things, I am very sure that it is not going to work. So for that matter, I'll try to help you with a suggestion. Try to remember the most important dates. That is, see, we are about to learn one particular short story written by Ernest Hemingway. That is the Snows of Kilimanjaro. Make sure that you study the year of publication of this particular short story. Yes, the same goes with all other relevant major works prescribed in your study material. So the major work, it is always advisable to study the year of publication also. Apart from that, you just need to know when this person was born and maybe when he passed away, so that you get an idea regarding his lifespan and the period in which he or she wrote these significant works. So I'll quickly introduce you to an outline regarding the life and works of Ernest Hemingway. So he was born in the month of July in the year 1899. He graduated from Oak Park High School and later he worked as a reporter on the Kansas City Star. His first collection of short stories, that too in the year 1924. Thereafter, he published a few other stories. The details are given in your study material. If interested, you may have a look at that. The Old Man and the Sea, this particular story was published in the year 1951. And remember, he received the Nobel Prize for Literature. Do you know the year? It was in the year 1954. Remember that. You can make use of this in your TE as well. Ernest Hemingway received the Nobel Prize for Literature in the year 1954. And it was in the year 1961 that he passed away, in the month of July 1961. So to give you an overview regarding Ernest Hemingway, we can undoubtedly say that he was one of the most significant fiction writers of the 20th century. Remember, he belonged to the 20th century. He is very famous for his specific style of writing. So when you have a detailed understanding of this that we are about to study, we will also come across the iceberg theory, which he has been using in most of his write-ups. So yes, he is famous for his specific style of writing. One notable aspect is that after you read his stories, you get the main idea, but still there are many things that remain unspoken or have a deeper meaning or connotation when we have a detailed look at his short stories. More or less, this particular short story, The Snows of Kilimanjaro, will help you to understand the art and ideas of Hemingway's literary output. So shall we focus our attention towards the themes and concerns in Hemingway's works? See, this would give you a general overview. This is not specifically concerned with this particular work, that is the Snows of Kilimanjaro. This section 4.2.2, themes and concerns, will give you an overview regarding the literary outputs of Ernest Hemingway and the various themes and concerns seen in his writing. So why should you have an understanding regarding this section? It is because when they ask you questions, mostly they ask you to write in general regarding, say, the style of Hemingway or the concerns or themes seen in Hemingway, etc. Once the question was to examine the theme of Snows of Kilimanjaro and the technique Hemingway employs to project this theme, here this is a work specified question. That is, here you need to focus your attention towards Snows of Kilimanjaro and then formulate your answers. But then again, there is another question. I'll read that out for you. Discuss the major concerns of Hemingway in his short stories and the formal strategies he often adopts in highlighting them. If you have a closer look at this question, you'll understand that this is more or less a general question, and there are high chances for them to ask such a general question. I would say it would help you also, because if it is a very work specific question, you would find it difficult to write more, because this is a short story and you haven't been provided with a lot of material specific to this particular short story. So if they ask you a general question, you will have more to write. I would say you can always prepare your answers in advance, even before going to your TE. That's because you can always have a general introduction to each and every work that you are studying. By general introduction, I am referring to, a set answer that you can use for every other question as well. That is, the very first introduction, as I mentioned, would include details regarding the life and works of the author. May that be anybody prescribed in your study material. Are you able to follow me? Do I make sense to you? See, with the aid of such smart work, you will be able to score better with respect to your TEE. Ultimately, your aim must be to have an overview regarding American literature. Always keep that in mind. It's not just for the sake of TEE that you are studying. Please keep that in mind always. Nevertheless, you need to pass as well, because very often I've seen learners finding it difficult to pass the TEs. That's mainly because they don't spend enough time preparing. I can understand the situation, because every single one of you is occupied with a lot of other work as well. May that be anything related to your workplace or household or anything. So I understand the situation. That is why I'm trying to help you with some tips and techniques. I suppose you make a note of all these things and it will certainly help you. So yes, let's move on to the themes and concerns with respect to Hemingway. Very often violence becomes a theme, a prominent theme in most of his writing. The violence at the heart of men and things. This is seen in most of Hemingway's writing. It is not just physical violence but also psychic violence. You can see that Hemingway's choice of characters, may that be choice of situation, sense of life and world, they all evoke the emotions of fear, pain, anxiety, empathy, tension, trauma and so forth. So I'm not sure whether you are aware of the term trauma. So is there anybody who has opted for BPCS 186? It's basically a course on stress management. It's a second year lecture. Yes. So there we'll study trauma in detail, because trauma and stress are interrelated. Those people who have trauma related to some incident or some aspect would certainly feel. In Malayalam we say ഒരു ആഘാതം ഉണ്ടാവുകയാണ്, മറക്കാൻ പറ്റാത്ത, നമുക്ക് വളരെ വേദനാജനകമായ ഒരു സിറ്റുവേഷൻ നമ്മുടെ ലൈഫിലുണ്ടായ, that could be a trauma, മറക്കാനാവാത്ത ഒരു ഭയാനകമായ, or കുറച്ച് accept ചെയ്യാൻ പ്രയാസകരമായ, it could be a separation, at times it could be an abuse, verbal or physical or no matter what. So all these could be traumatic in nature. So we were discussing the themes and concerns in Hemingway. So remember, this is important. When you prepare your TEE, when you prepare for your TEE, you need to mark and study the themes and concerns. No matter whether they ask you specific question regarding the theme and aspects, regarding the theme and concerns in Hemingway, if at all there comes a question from Hemingway, trust me, there will be a question on Hemingway. Then you can make use of all such details. If it is an essay question, this would fall under paragraph 2 of your answer. If you look at section 4.2.2, also mentioned regarding metaphors in Hemingway's works. Violence is one of the prominent metaphor in most of his works, and if you look at the themes in his short stories, it would range from shocks of experience, violence of war, man-woman relationships, quintessential nothingness, and celebrations of values. Dear learners, from your TEE perspective, make sure that you study these 5 themes. Remember, these are applicable to all the works of Hemingway, not just for the Snows of Kilimanjaro. Keep that in mind. And there was a term, quintessential. What do you mean by that? I'm very sure that most of you are not aware of this term. See, if such words come up, make sure that you refer and understand the meaning. Alright? Quintessential means typical. That's all. So, yes, in most of the short stories, we can also see boy protagonists. Okay, and most of them will be experiencing some kind of shocking, violent aspects in life. There in your study material, they've given examples from The Killers, The Battler, and My Old Man. All these are other prominent works written by Hemingway. So when you have time, we can't go on explaining each and every line considering the time constraints of an academic counseling session, but you have time because you'll certainly need to prepare for your TEE. So when you start preparing, make sure that you read such relevant aspects also. So there are also stories that are focused on the theme of war and violence of war, and these stories Hemingway used to call them invaluable and irreplaceable as a subject. And it is in these stories that he captures people under tremendous stress and before and after. So he portrays people who experience trauma and stress in some of his writings. It would be always better if you could substantiate your statement with the aid of a relevant work written by Hemingway. For that matter, you can refer to your study material, I mean your IGNOU official study material section 4.2.2. Now let's focus our attention towards the modes of writing. How Hemingway presents his work in front of us, how he has written his works of art. While looking at his modes of writing, Hemingway's most memorable lesson in writing came from Lionel Moise. That is to say, to some extent, Hemingway was highly influenced by Lionel Moise and his views on writing. Who was Lionel Moise? He was an older colleague of Hemingway, especially during his journalistic days at the Kansas City Star. We already discussed this aspect while we were discussing the life and works of Hemingway. So, Lionel Moise, he used to say that, I quote, "Pure objective writing is the only true form of story writing. No stream of consciousness nonsense, no playing dumb observer one paragraph and God Almighty the next. In short, no tricks." I unquote. So Hemingway religiously followed this golden piece of advice. That is to say, he blindly sticked on to this particular piece of advice, and it is how he started writing his own works. So we can say that Hemingway always tried to cut out overtly emotional exaggeration without lapsing into emotional suppression. That is to say, he attempted to stimulate and regulate emotion and to keep it clean and functional. So he emphasizes upon the right selection of external details such as facts, images, events, and actions, which automatically evoked the inward emotion of the reader. So this method of using selective and representative details of experience, why are they used? In order to take the intended emotion. So this particular technique can be seen in close terms to what T.S. Eliot had described as the use of objective correlative in any artistic creation. So now comes the question, who is T.S. Eliot? You must have heard of this name at some point in life, especially because each and every one of you is a student of English language and literature. Thomas Stearns Eliot, popularly known as T.S. Eliot, he was a poet, essayist, publisher, playwright, literary critic and editor, and is undoubtedly considered as one of the 20th century's major poets. He is also a very central figure in English language modernist poetry. He has also contributed as a literary critic, and one major contribution is the concept of objective correlative. I quote from Eliot, "Objective correlative is a set of objects, a situation, a chain of events which shall be the formula of that particular emotion, such that when the external facts which must terminate in sensory experience are given, the emotion is immediately evoked." To put it in simple terms, an objective correlative is an object in the story that serves a symbolic purpose. It is an everyday item that possesses some thematic presence or conjures an image or jokes an emotional response from the reader, implying a meaning larger than what is actually there. It connotes to something. It serves a symbolic purpose. So, we were speaking about the resemblance between the two theories by Eliot and Hemingway. Hemingway seems to have used something that can be analyzed as if similar to theory from T.S. Eliot. So the resemblance between these two theories was too conspicuous to be merely accidental. And remember, who was the first to state it? It was T.S. Eliot who stated it in English criticism for the very first time. But surprisingly, we don't see any kind of acknowledgement mentioned by Hemingway even while he used this aspect in his writing. Surprisingly, he was hostile towards the author of The Wasteland and Four Quatrains. Who is the author mentioned? Yes, it is T.S. Eliot who wrote The Wasteland and the Four Quatrains. These are basically his poetry, his two poems. Wasteland is considered as if his magnum opus. It's highly renowned and is prescribed for syllabus. Even for our MA course, MEG 1, we have Wasteland for detailed study. It's for the MA course, not for you. Don't worry. So, his attitude can be considered as if a defense mechanism in order to preempt any possible suggestion of his indebtedness. He doesn't want to show indebtedness, it seems. More or less, it is said that he was an egoist by nature. Hemingway has used this kind of strategy against most of his major contemporaries. What do you mean by the term contemporary? Contemporary writers refers to any writer who lived and wrote during his age. Yes. So, who were the major contemporaries of Hemingway? They include Sherwood Anderson, Ford Madox Ford, Gertrude Stein, and Scott Fitzgerald. You must have heard of this name. He is very famous for his popular novel, The Great Gatsby. There is also a movie related to this novel. I believe it is kind of an adaptation. What do you mean by the term adaptation? Books very often get adapted, right? For example, if you are an ardent fan of Harry Potter, you must have you must be having an idea that Harry Potter got translated into movies, right? Yes. So there are 7 books and 8 movies. Now let's focus our attention solely towards the Snows of Kilimanjaro. So before moving on to the textual analysis and details, let me give you an overview regarding the summary of this particular short story. Why is that important? It is of immense importance simply because it is mandatory to know this story. Very often we find learners just reading the explanation given in the study material rather than referring to the original source. See, it is ideally expected that you read the original short story. It's a short story, dear ones. It's not so very lengthy. So it's possible for you to read. Nevertheless, at least be familiar with the summary. So I'll explain the summary. Then again, within the time constraints, I'll mention the most important events. So this short story, The Snows of Kilimanjaro, opens with a paragraph about Mount Kilimanjaro. You must be knowing that it is the highest mountain in Africa, which is also called the House of God. It is also told that a frozen carcass of a leopard is seen near the summit. What do you mean by carcass? It means a dead body. A dead body of a leopard is seen near the summit. That is also mentioned. But the irony is nobody knows why it is there. Later, we get introduced to the main characters of this short story. The central character is named Harry. He is a writer. And there is Helen, who's actually Harry's wife. She is described as if a very rich lady who is quite considerate towards her husband. But it is remarkable to notice that Harry is dying of gangrene, which is actually affected his leg. What do you mean by that? Gangrene. It basically refers to a condition where death of a body tissue happens due to lack of blood flow or a serious bacterial infection. But here in his case, it actually was caused due to a thorn, a scratching that happened as a result of that wound. He scratched it, it seems, and he did not apply iodine as an antiseptic. So his wound got infected. So that is what happened. So this situation makes him irritable, and he speaks about his own death in matter-of-fact way, and that in a way upsets Helen, his wife. So he even predicts that a rescue plane will never come. That is, they were waiting for someone to rescue them out of this desert, but Harry had this thought in mind that that is never going to happen. That is, there were some aspects of foreshadowing of death even at this stage, even at the opening of this short story. So he quarrels with her over everything, for even simple matters. Helen is obviously concerned for Harry's welfare, but self-pity and frustration makes Harry unpleasant to her also. Then we see Harry, he begins to think of his life and experiences, and he even feels some amount of regret. That is, he feels that he has never reached his potential as a writer. Why is that so? It is because he has chosen to make his living by marrying a series of wealthy women. One interesting aspect is that throughout the text, I mean the original short story, we see portions of italicized text. So this is where Hemingway narrates some of Harry's experiences in a stream of consciousness style. Dear learners, remember, stream of consciousness style. It was a literary technique which was more or less employed by most of the modernist writers. So it simply refers to connection of thoughts. It is a stream of thoughts. The writer would move on from one particular thought to other. Here, with respect to Harry, it is the flow of memories. He speaks about a lot of memories. Harry's first memories are some of the activities that he did while traveling around Europe. This include following a battle, hiding a deserter in a cottage, hunting and skiing in the mountains, etc. Harry then falls asleep and wakes in the evening to find Helen returning from a shooting expedition. It's the desert, so she must have gone for some shooting practice. So later he recalls the process by which he developed this gangrene 2 weeks ago, that is 2 weeks before the present day. So he had been trying to get a picture of some water bug and had scratched his knee on a thorn. As I mentioned, it was caused due to a thorn. He had not used iodine and it had become septic. So as Helen returns to drink cocktails with Harry, they make up their quarrel. Remember, they've been quarreling. Now about the second memory sequence, he recalls how he once patronized a series of prostitutes in Constantinople while pining for a woman in New York. So there are some subplots, you may refer to that. Later they have their dinner, and then Harry has another memory, this time of how his grandfather's log house burned down. Next, he remembers an officer named Williamson who was hit by a bomb and to whom Harry subsequently fed all his morphine tablets. Later, we come to the core area. Harry lies on his cot, remembering that he feels the presence of death and associates it with a hyena that is running around the edge of the campsite. Remember, there was a hyena around the campsite. So Helen has Harry's cot moved into the tent for the night, and he feels death lying on his chest and is unable to speak. That is what is mentioned. Later he sleeps, and in his sleep he has a reverie. By reverie we refer to a dream. Remember, he is dreaming. In his dream it is the next morning, and in this particular dream, the next morning, a man called Compton has come with a plane to rescue him. See how he imagines, how he dreams, how he hallucinates that his friend Compton would come and rescue him. So he is lifted onto the plane, watches the landscape go by beneath him. Suddenly he notices something. What exactly is that? It is the Mount Kilimanjaro. So he sees the snow-covered top of Mount Kilimanjaro, but he realizes that this is where he is bound. So this has references to the afterlife. Why is that so? I'll explain. Now, while he was dreaming, Helen wakes up suddenly in the middle of the night, and the reason could be because of this hyena. She must have heard this hyena cry, and to her surprise, she sees that Harry is dead. So that's all regarding the story. From a critical perspective, the story focuses on the self-critical ruminations and memories of a writer. Who is he? Harry, who's dying of a preventable case of gangrene on safari. Unfortunately, he wouldn't be saved. Remember, its main themes are death and regret. We'll discuss that in detail in course of time. Then the use of symbolism is also very important. In terms of style, we should understand that Hemingway narrates the sequences between Harry and Helen in a very straightforward third-person format and breaks into italicized stream of consciousness for Harry's many memory sequences. I mentioned that while I was explaining the summary. So these memories are often conveyed using run-on sentences and consist of pastiches of character, places and events. So if you look at the original short story, the text, you can see such aspects. Now, according to Hemingway scholars, these memories are mostly autobiographical in nature. That is, it could have some references to Hemingway's own life incidents. That is what is mentioned. So if you look at page number 130, that is section 4.3 of your official study material, you can see a detailed explanation on the Snows of Kilimanjaro. So according to the material, it says that Hemingway opens the story with Harry, a writer, and his wife Helen, and remember they are stranded while on safari in Africa. And the reason for his gangrene is mentioned. It has been infected mainly because he didn't apply iodine after he scratched the wound. So they wait for a rescue plane from Nairobi that he knows won't arrive on time. That's also mentioned. Harry spends his time drinking and insulting Helen. He reviews his life, realizing that he wasted his talent in many ways. And there is also a mention regarding a marriage to a wealthy woman that he doesn't love. Probably a mention regarding Helen herself. Now comes the series of flashbacks, that is the memories. He recalls the mountains of Bulgaria and Constantinople, the feeling of being alone in Paris, and all other details you can see in your study material as part of pages 130 and 131. Now, his awareness regarding that is also mentioned. He is aware that vultures are walking around his camp and a hyena lurks in the shadows. So knowing that he will die before he wakes up, Harry goes to sleep and dreams that the rescue plane is taking him to a snow-covered summit of Kilimanjaro. So speaking about the symbolism, the use of suggestion and symbolism is based on Hemingway's belief that the dignity of movement of an iceberg lies in only 1/8 of it being on the surface of the water. That is, in spite of his tough exterior and his formidable reputation for boxing, big game hunting, bullfighting and fishing, he was a very sensitive artist. Remember the iceberg theory that I mentioned towards the beginning of this session? Yes, it is the same theory that has been mentioned on page number 131. Another work by Hemingway titled A Clean, Well-Lighted Place is also mentioned here. It is said that it is a glowing testimony to such a practice of the craft of short story writing epitomized by Ernest Hemingway. So if you get time, you may even refer to this particular short story written by Ernest Hemingway. So now let's move on to the major themes and aspects of study. As mentioned, these include life and death and artistic creation. With respect to artistic creation, you should remember that Harry's failure to achieve the artistic success he sought in his life is one of the main themes in this short story. And moreover, the character of Harry comes very close to being a representation of Hemingway itself. Remember what I spoke about the scholars who studied on Hemingway? Yes, it is their opinion also that there are resemblances. So in the italicized flashbacks, remember I mentioned that? Yes, we see Harry as he was in his earlier life, especially in Paris, where he lived in bohemian poverty and devoted his energies to writing. But he consistently regrets leaving that behind. He gave up in a sense and began spending his time drinking, traveling, hunting and chasing rich women. He became what he despised, as the narrator says. So hence at one point he explicitly equates that rotten poetry, that statement. He uses his verbal talents to quarrel with his wife, and instead of seeking to heighten his sensations, he dulls them with alcohol. That is, he ruins his creativity, his own artistic creation. In this sense, the hyena that lurks around his tent is not only creeping death, but also his pangs of regret as he wasting his artistic gifts. So this hyena has double connotations. One, death, and the second one is the wasting of his artistic creation. Remember, that is one of the major themes. The theme of regret is also seen. Remember to mention the theme of regret also. Now comes the theme of life and death. In short, we find that this is a story of an imminent death. What do you mean by imminent? About to happen, that's the meaning. So the Snows of Kilimanjaro is suffused, that is, it's full of images of death. So death's presence is always felt throughout this novel. The very opening, the very beginning is like death, it's painless. Harry says in the first line, referring to his oncoming demise, and ends with a reference to the ironic comparison of the woman's heart beating loudly and the stillness of Harry's lifeless body. Remember the scene when Helen found out that Harry is no more? Yes, that's the reference. Death is symbolically figured in two senses. Firstly, as the pristine whiteness of the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro, and secondly, as the creeping, filthy hyena that lurks outside of Harry's tent. That is, death is symbolized firstly through the summit of Mount Kilimanjaro, and the journey shows more or less the journey of the afterlife. We'll look at that aspect. And remember, the second one is the image of the filthy hyena. So we can observe that Harry's attitude towards his death also wavers throughout the text. That is, at first he puts up a very brave front, and later we understand that he more or less starts to regret and he sulks over the fact that he has been more or less a failure. That is, he couldn't achieve what he had to accomplish. That mention is there. Then he constantly brings death into the story, the use of symbolism. Remember that there could be a question on the use of symbolism. Moreover, there will definitely be a question where you will have to write all the general aspects. Remember to write, the reverie, the dream. See, when we speak about death, when death comes in this particular story, it is not rotten, lingering or painful, rather it is transcendent. That is, Harry slips into a reverie, a dream in which he hallucinates that his friend Compton arrives in an aeroplane to take him to find medical care. So if he had been taken, he could have been saved, right? Yes. So as the plane takes off, the plane passes by the blinding white summit of Kilimanjaro. See, this is an important mention where we could see overtones of death and afterlife. So as Harry passes the image, we, the readers, are reminded of the epigraph of the story, in which Hemingway says that close to the western summit there is the dried and frozen carcass of a leopard. See, the dead body of a leopard is mentioned, so that can be read in overtones with the death of our hero Harry also. So no one has explained what the leopard was seeing at that altitude also. So Harry seems to have found something, though, a release from his earthly problems. So he's dead, he's free of all his earthly problems, and now he's moving to afterlife. So that reminds me of yet another work with similar overtones of death. I'll give you a clue. It is a piece of poem. It is an American poetry. Yes. It is written by Emily Dickinson. Are you able to remember the poem? Yes. Because I could not stop for death. So we'll look at this particular poem in our upcoming session. We'll deal with Emily Dickinson in detail, and we'll discuss Because I Could Not Stop for Death. So to sum up what we have studied today, we looked at Ernest Hemingway, his life and works. Thereafter, we focused on the themes and concerns, his writing style, his mode of writing in general. Remember, he made use of stream of consciousness, objective correlative, and all the relevant aspects that we discussed. Make a note of it. I'm very sure that there will be a question from this particular short story. It could probably be a general question. Nevertheless, be prepared with specific answers with respect to the Snows of Kilimanjaro. Also, remember to have an overview regarding the story. I suppose I explained it to you. Apart from that, study the symbolism, study the themes. Okay, you should have a detailed understanding on the theme of life and death, the symbol of death. Then artistic recreation as a theme, then he regrets his life experiences. All such things should be mentioned. So I suppose you will be able to attempt your TEE confidently. Towards the end of our counseling sessions, I'll discuss the previous question papers in detail also. To have a quick mention, for the December 2021 TEE, this question was asked. Okay, question for I suppose a short question was asked. So when you study short questions, you can prepare with respect to short stories. They could even ask you an essay, which is very unlikely to happen. Mostly they'll ask you short questions. Annotations will not be there from short stories. Mostly annotations are from poetry. The poetry that we are going to study next, Emily Dickinson. For the December 21 TEE, there was an essay question, a 20 marks essay question with respect to Emily Dickinson's Because I Could Not Stop for Death. We'll discuss that. Then what about the other essay questions? Mostly these essay questions will be from blocks 1 and 2. We have discussed All My Sons, the drama in detail. That block 1 of BEGC105, American Literature. Another prominent essay question would probably be from the Scarlet Letter, which is block 2 of this particular course code. So dear learners, remember that my playlist on BEGC105 is always available for you. You may refer to those lectures and prepare for your TEE effectively. So to sum up this particular work, Snows of Kilimanjaro, in a nutshell, it is more or less a combination of fact and fiction. It also has traces of autobiographical elements. So in the story, while facing his imminent death on an African safari, Harry, a writer, goes in and out of consciousness. Remember the stream of consciousness technique also. So this sense of personal, that is the element of, subjectivity, adds more intensity and also depth to this particular story. So remember, these memories are based on Hemingway's own experiences and professional career as well. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for joining me. We'll meet again next class. We'll discuss Emily Dickinson's Because I Could Not Stop for Death. Remember, this falls under block 4 of the course code BEGC105. Thank you. Best wishes.